You think you know him. If you grew up in the 80 seconds, Michael J. Fox wasn't just an actor to you. He was the face of American optimism. He was Alex P. Keaton in Family Ties, wearing a tie and carrying a briefcase. He was Marty McFly in Back to the Future, skateboarding behind cars and rewriting history. He represented energy, youth, and the feeling that we could control time itself. He had it all: the fame, the money, the world in the palm of his hand. But what if I told you that while we were watching him conquer Hollywood, he was living a double life that nearly destroyed him? This isn't a story about the awards he won, and this isn't some cheap tabloid gossip about a celebrity falling from grace. This is the story of a stolen decade that history almost forgot. A time between 1990 and 2000, when the boy who never aged was actually fighting a secret war in the dark. Banished to the shadows, he wasn't a hero. He was a desperate man, hiding a shaking hand in his pocket, terrified that his life was over before he hit 30. Stay with me until the end. Because the truth Michael J. Fox was hiding wasn't just about a disease. It was about a man who had to lose his mind to find his soul. Let's look at the paradox that defines his life. On one side, you have the Michael J. Fox of 1990. He is the biggest star on the planet. He just finished the Back to the Future trilogy. He is the golden boy of Hollywood. To the public, he is agile, quick-witted, and untouchable. But strip away the magazine covers, and you find a completely different reality happening in a hot, humid hotel room in Florida. It's 1991. Michael is filming a romantic comedy called Doc Hollywood. He wakes up one morning with a hangover. That's normal for a young star. But then he feels it. A twitch. It's not his whole body. It's just his left pinky finger. It's moving on its own. It's tapping against the bedsheet, dancing to a rhythm he didn't choose. He thinks, "This is crazy. I'm 29 years old. I'm an athlete. I play hockey." He tells himself he must have hit his funny bone on set. He enters a state of deep denial. He goes to work. He smiles for the cameras. He ignores the finger. But the finger doesn't stop. 6 months later, he walks into a neurologist's office in New York. He expects a pinched nerve, maybe a muscle strain. Instead, he gets a death sentence for his career. The doctor tells him, "You have young-onset Parkinson's disease." And then the doctor drops the hammer, a prediction that would haunt Michael for the next 10 years. He says, "You have about 10 years left to work." Just think about that for a second. The irony is cruel. The actor, famous for playing a time traveler, was suddenly told he was running out of time. This diagnosis triggered a panic in his subconscious that nobody saw. To us, he was still the funny, charming guy on screen. But inside, he felt like a fraud. He felt like he was rotting from the inside out. He believed that by the time he turned 40, he would be a cash machine that was broken and useless. So, what do you do when you think your life is ending? Do you fight? Do you cry? No. Michael did something much more dangerous. He decided to run. But he didn't run to a doctor, and he didn't run to his wife. He ran straight toward something that almost killed him faster than the Parkinsons ever could. To understand why Michael ran from the truth, we have to understand the lie he was living. Go back to the 1980s. Michael J. Fox wasn't just an actor. He was the poster child for the American dream in the Reagan era. He played Alex P. Keaton and Marty McFly characters who were fast, smart, and always in control. He represented the idea that if you just moved fast enough, you could outrun anything, even time itself. This created a false belief that wired his brain for disaster. He learned that his value as a human being was tied entirely to his energy. If he was moving, he was lovable. If he was still, he was nothing. So, When he walked into that neurologist's office in 1991, he didn't just get a diagnosis, he got an expiration date. The doctor looked at this 29-year-old superstar and said 7 words that would drive him to the edge of insanity. "You have about 10 years left to work." Read that again, 10 years. For a normal person, that is a difficult prognosis. But for Michael J. Fox, it was a total psychological collapse. This diagnosis triggered a subconscious panic. He suddenly saw himself not as a husband or a father, but as a cash machine that was about to break down. He believed that the moment the world saw him shake, the love would stop. He believed that by age 40, he would be a useless, invalid, tossed aside by the industry that worshipped him. This is where the imposter syndrome kicked in, but with a cruel twist. Usually, imposter syndrome is thinking you aren't good enough. For Michael, it was the terrifying gap between his public persona and his private reality. Every time he smiled for a camera, he felt like a liar. Outside, he was the golden boy who defied aging. Inside, he felt like his own body was betraying him, rotting from the inside out. He was terrified, but he couldn't show it, because in Hollywood, you don't show weakness, you don't show pain. So, instead of dealing with the grief of losing his future, he decided to squeeze every last drop of money out of the present. He didn't know it yet, but this fear was about to push him into a stolen decade of bad movies, secret pain, and a dangerous new best friend found at the bottom of a bottle. So, how do you fight a war when you know you're going to lose? Michael J. Fox made a decision that would define his entire decade. Driven by that terrifying prognosis that he only had 10 years left, he didn't slow down to take care of himself. He hit the accelerator. He adopted a mindset that he later called the Pillowcase Strategy. In his own words, his plan was to break out the pillowcases, loot the palace, and escape with whatever I could. He viewed Hollywood not as an art form anymore, but as a burning building, and he was going to grab every bag of cash he could before the roof collapsed. This was his rise in activity, but his first mistake in judgment. Because of this panic, his instincts failed him. In 1990, a script landed on his desk. It was a strange movie about a ghost trying to save his girlfriend. Michael read it and said, "It shows I can be an idiot too." He couldn't see how romance, horror, and comedy could mix, so he passed on the role of Sam Wheat. That movie was Ghost. It went on to make $505 million and starred Patrick Swayze. Instead of taking risks on potential masterpieces, Michael chose safety. He chose volume. He signed up for mediocre comedies like Life with Mikey and Greedy. He became exactly what he feared, a cash machine trying to outrun his own biology. But while he was busy looting the palace by day, a much darker story was unfolding by night. You see, Michael wasn't just working to make money, he was working to not feel. The Parkinson's diagnosis had created a split in his soul. To deal with the terror of his body stiffening up, he found a new best friend: alcohol. But this wasn't the fun, party boy drinking of the 80 seconds. This was different. Michael described this phase as joyless and secretive. He wouldn't drink at parties. He would wait until his wife, Tracy, and his son went to sleep. Then, he would sit alone in the dark, pouring drink after drink, trying to disassociate, to separate his mind from the body that was betraying him. He was building a wall. On one side was the movie star. On the other was a terrified man hiding a tremor. And in the middle, a bottle. He thought he was protecting his family by suffering in silence, but he was actually destroying the very thing he was trying to save. Tracy Pollan, his anchor, was watching him drift away. She didn't know the full extent of the fear, but she felt the cold distance of a man who was checking out of his own life. He thought the alcohol was the cure for his anxiety. In reality, It was the fuel for a crash that was waiting around the corner. And that crash? It didn't happen on a movie set. It happened on his living room floor. Michael J. Fox was sober. He had saved his marriage, but he hadn't saved himself from the fear. Remember that doctor's voice? You have 10 years left. By 1993, that clock was ticking louder than ever. Michael was convinced that his career had an expiration date. He believed that soon the audience would see the shake, and the applause would stop. So, he made a decision that changed the trajectory of his career. He stopped trying to be an artist, and he started trying to be a survivor. In his memoir, he called this the Pillowcase Strategy. The idea was simple and heartbreaking. Imagine the palace is burning down. You don't look for the most beautiful art to save. You grab a pillowcase, you stuff it with as much silver and gold as you can carry, and you run before the roof collapses. He wanted to loot the palace of Hollywood before he was kicked out. This panic led to the first great fall of his career. He stopped being selective. He started saying yes to everything, just to cash the checks. While he was busy making forgettable movies like Life with Mikey or Greedy, he was saying no to history. Did you know Michael J. Fox was offered the lead role in Ghost? That movie made over $500 million, but Michael turned it down. He couldn't understand how a movie could be funny, scary, and sad all at the same time. He later said, "It shows I can be an idiot too." He was also considered for Jerry Maguire. Imagine that, but he couldn't do it. He was too busy running, too busy hiding, too busy filling that pillowcase. But the real fall wasn't about the movies. It was about the physical torture he was enduring to keep the secret alive. By 1996, he returned to TV with Spin City. To you, he looked energetic. He was the sharp, witty Mike Flaherty. But if you go back and watch closely now, you will see a man fighting a war in every single frame. He developed a set of tricks to fool us. Look at his hands. He is always holding something: a pen, a clipboard, a coffee cup. This was the busy hand technique. If his hand was squeezing a prop, it couldn't shake. Look at how he stands. He is rarely standing free. He is leaning against a door frame. He is sitting on a desk. He is holding onto a chair. This was called anchoring. He was literally holding onto the furniture to keep his body from betraying him. But here is the twist that makes this tragedy even darker. The shaking you eventually saw? That wasn't just the Parkinson's, that was the medicine. To perform, Michael had to take massive doses of levodopa, but the side effect is something called dyskinesia, uncontrollable, dancing movements. So, every day on set, he had a brutal choice. If he didn't take the pills, he would be frozen like a statue, unable to move or speak. If he did take the pills, he could move, but he couldn't stop moving. He chose the movement. He chose the pain. He chose to torture his body just to make us laugh for 22 minutes a week. He was the highest-paid actor on television, but behind the scenes, he was in agony. He was waiting for the moment when the mask would finally slip. And in 1998, he couldn't hold it anymore. We love stories where the hero fights back. We love the idea that if you just stay positive, you can beat anything. But gravity doesn't care about your optimism. Michael J. Fox's darkest night wasn't just one moment. It was a slow, brutal realization that the pillowcase strategy is the desperate attempt to outrun his fate had failed. By 1998, the mask he wore on Spin City was suffocating him. He was no longer just fighting Parkinson's, he was fighting the cure. To perform, he had to take so much medication that his body developed dyskinesia, uncontrollable, agonizing, twisting movements. He had a choice every single morning. Do not take the pills and be frozen like a statue, or take the pills and writhe in pain while trying to be funny. He chose the pain. He chose the mask. until he simply couldn't anymore. In 1998, he told the world, and in 2000, he walked away from the show. He thought that was the end of the battle. He thought that was the bottom. He was wrong. The true collapse was waiting for him in his own kitchen years later. Fast forward to 2018. Michael had survived a risky surgery to remove a tumor from his spinal cord. The doctor had warned him, "Who wants to be the guy who paralyzes Michael J. Fox?" But Michael survived. He learned to walk again. He felt invincible. Then came the morning he was alone in his kitchen. He pivoted to get breakfast. His feet got tangled. He fell. It wasn't a stumble. It was a demolition. He hit the floor so hard he shattered his upper arm. The bone didn't just break. It exploded. 19 pins and a metal plate were needed to put him back together. Lying on that cold floor, waiting for the ambulance, something inside him finally broke. But it wasn't a bone. It was his toxic positivity. For decades, Michael had sold us lemonade. He was the guy who made lemonade out of lemons. He was the eternal optimist. But staring at the ceiling, in absolute agony, he realized he had been lying to himself. He realized that no amount of smiling would knit his bones back together. He later said this was the moment he went out of the lemonade business. This was the epiphany. You cannot fix everything. He realized he had spent 30 years trying to solve his life, trying to be the hero who saves the day. But on that floor, he realized he wasn't the director of this movie. He was just a witness. He couldn't smile this away. He couldn't act his way out of this scene. The darkest night wasn't about the pain. It was about the death of the savior complex. He realized he had to stop trying to be the golden boy who defies reality and start being the man who accepts it. Gravity is real, and for the first time, Michael J. Fox stopped trying to float. I have focused this section on the epiphany mentioned in your structure and the specific details of his injuries and attitude shift found in the investigative report. It is optimized for text-to-speech with a raw, honest tone. So, how do you find redemption when your body is breaking apart? For Michael J. Fox, redemption didn't come from a miracle cure. It came from a brutal admission. Lying on that kitchen floor with a shattered arm, waiting for the ambulance, he said something to himself that changed everything. He said, "I'm out of the lemonade business." For years, he had been the guy who made lemonade out of lemons. He was the poster child for optimism. He made us feel comfortable with his disease. But on that floor, with 19 pins and a metal plate about to be screwed into his arm, he realized he was done selling us a fantasy. He realized that toxic positivity was a trap. This was his redemption. The truth. He stopped trying to be the hero who beats the odds. He started being a human who survives them. And the cost of this survival was staggering. Look at the list of what this man has endured since 2018. It reads like a war casualty report, not a celebrity bio. He broke his shoulder and had to have it replaced. He broke his orbital bone and his cheek by smashing his face into the floor. He almost lost his hand to a severe infection after surgery. He called this period of his life a festival of self-abuse. Gravity is real, he said, and it doesn't care if you are a movie star. But here is the beautiful part. Here is the redemption. When he stopped trying to look cool, he finally became free. Remember the young Michael who hid his hand in his pocket? Remember the actor who leaned against walls to stop the shaking? That man is gone. Today, Michael J. Fox uses a wheelchair if he has to. He uses a cane. He walks with a guy holding his belt so he doesn't fall. He said, "Whatever works to not fall down, I use all those tools." He stopped caring about the public persona. He stopped worrying if we thought he was strong. By accepting that he was broken, he became unbreakable. He found a peace that fame never gave him. He realized that the price of freedom was simply letting go of the lie. He wasn't Mike the actor anymore. He wasn't even Mike the actor with Parkinson's. He was just Mike. And just when he thought his contribution to the world was over, he realized he had one last massive role to play. Not on a screen, but in a laboratory. So, here is the final truth about the stolen decade. We spent the 90 seconds watching Michael J. Fox run. We watched him run on screen, and we didn't know he was running for his life off screen. He was running from a diagnosis, running from depression, and running from the truth. But looking at him now, we see the greatest plot twist of all. The disease took his movement. It took his ability to play guitar. It took his ability to walk without falling. But it gave him something the golden boy never had: absolute freedom. When he was healthy, he was a prisoner of other people's expectations. He was terrified of being seen as weak. Now that he is physically broken, he is finally whole. He isn't Mike the movie star anymore. He isn't even Mike the actor with Parkinson's. As he said during his identity crisis, he is just Mike. And that is his true legacy. It's not Back to the Future. It's not Family Ties. His legacy is the lesson that you don't have to be fixed to be okay. He taught us that optimism isn't about ignoring the fire. It's about knowing you can survive the burn. He stopped selling us lemonade and started giving us the truth, that gravity is real, that life hurts, and that it is still worth living. I want to leave you with a question. And I don't want a simple answer. Michael J. Fox spent 10 years hiding his shaking hand in a pocket because he thought we would stop loving him if we saw the truth. What is the shaking hand in your life that you are hiding in your pocket? What is the weakness, the flaw, or the secret you are terrified to show the world because you think it makes you less valuable? Let's talk about it in the comments. Because if Michael's story teaches us anything, it's that the things we hide are often the things that can set us free. I'm Peter, and this has been the story of the man who had to lose control to finally find himself.